think I've begun to understand why I like Carlos Sainz so much. And we all thought Fernando Alonso was the chatterbox. No, he doesn't even make the top 10. Turns out it's the smooth operator who does like himself, like me, a bit of maximum yap. Credit to Stevie the Narwhal on Tumblr for creating a brilliant chart that shows, very loud and clear, Carlos Sainz is the best value driver in Formula 1 right now, because he's basically a motivational speaker with a steering wheel. And as a result, for him, according to this chart, talking on the radio during Grand Prix for over 9.5 hours, it shows that Carlos Sainz is clearly a liberated figure within Williams, that his style of talking and working with the team has been embraced, not resisted, or, if you're Ferrari, conveyed as if you're just being a bit of a selfish git, where he often felt like he was being underused or they were very slow on the uptake, and when you consider that his race engineer was Riccardo Adami and the struggles that Lewis Hamilton is going through this year, you can pretty much understand why he was a little bit, agitated on the radio. So yeah, I don't blame Carlos for sometimes having to break rank. It's why he got 2 of his 4 victories so far in Formula 1. But back to this chart from Stevie. I'll leave a link to the original post in my pinned comment so you can look at the very detailed breakdown of his. It's quite the fun time, definitely recommend it. The TLDR here is that it tracks driver-engineer radio time from race broadcasts. Retirements skew things a little bit, but the headline still holds. Carlos Sainz clocked over 9 hours of team radio this year, with over 3 hours more than the runner-up spot, Pierre Gasly. You'd probably be complaining over the radio as to why the Alpine was so slow. And when you look at the constructors table, you just realise that Carlos Sainz is the best bang for your buck driver on the grid right now, taking that team from 17 points in 2024 and being 9th to 137 just 12 months later, and in 5th place, best of the rest, and only 1 point off their 2016 total, so it's almost like the last several years never happened. Yes, of course, the car matters, but it's also a matter about how you use those cars, and quite clearly, what Sainz has been able to do in his acclimation year with this team is be able to extract the most out of it, despite upgrades really being thin on the ice, bar the occasional bodge job. And where we are right now, Williams very much looks like a team that knows what it's doing, even though there had been growing pains along the way this year. Him being able to get podiums in Baku and Qatar as well as the Austin Sprint, it's just going through strategic and consistent communication. No grey areas, there's no confusion, or at least much less confusion than there was in previous years. These are the kind of results that take a midfield year from muddling through, praying next year will be better, to be thinking, oh wow, maybe we might be a serious contender next year. Williams winning a Grand Prix next year, that will not surprise me at all. I don't think they'll be title contenders, but I certainly think they'll be in the mix for many more podiums, quite easily, as well as maybe the cheeky win. You heard it first, folks. That's one of my bold predictions for 2026. Because they were able to get P5 in the team standings and both drivers in the top 10 with a barely developed car. I remember James writing off this year as just being a processional year, trying to get all of their systems in place after he broke everything in 2024 deliberately. So no wonder Carlos was so quick to send a thank you letter and gift bag to every single staff member of Williams. And the reason why Williams saw this is simple. He has been, Carlos, a bandwidth upgrade. And that in turn has caused Alex Albon's own potential to expand as well. It's what James Vowles said himself around the time of him just casually romping to victory in GT racing on the side. Just a hobby. He said that Carlos correlates with Alex really well, and that 2 voices saying the same thing absolutely gives you direction on it. And look, James isn't here to blow yet more smoke up Carlos's chimney. He's already done that plenty with their flirtation arc. It's a more useful claim for race fans to really get behind, as well as going racing, as in you get plenty of information from the guy actually racing that car, instead of just relying on the computers and then thinking that will just translate lock, stock and barrel. As we've seen with Red Bull this year, that's clearly not been the case. We all know about the perils and frustrations of correlation, that being last year's buzzword in particular, 2024. It also ties into the continued notion that whilst Carlos Sainz is at a team, they sort of tighten up, they improve, they somehow look more dynamic and forward-thinking, and then the moment Carlos leaves, they either just stagnate or they have a bit of a wobble downwards before they can maybe right the ship with another person again. That trend is remaining still true with Williams, again, from 9th to 5th. That's probably been the biggest upward trend I've seen in his career. Yes, they absolutely milked him for all that he was worth, but did they actually take a lot of his stuff on board and carry it through so it could remain a legacy product for years to come, long after the Spaniard had moved on to another team or retired from the sport altogether? No, clearly not. In this sport, teams tend to lose because they're either wrong, they're late, or they're confused. Sometimes all three at once, like Ferrari at the moment. The car is a rolling physics debate, whilst the pit wall has plenty of data regarding tyres, fuel, traffic, what have you, but the driver has the only sensor that can feel what the rear is doing in turn 11 at that moment. Their bums. It's why Red Bull had to rely more on what Max and Yuki were feeling in the car at the time, rather than just relying on the simulator and hoping for the best. And this chart is a key part of my argument here. So once again, cheers Stevie for all of your hard work. In contrast, most drivers seem to be rather muted, probably saying the word copy so much that it started to lose all meaning. Yes, saying the word copy is useful in that you understand the instructions and the plans that the pit wall is giving you, but you're not exactly giving much in return. There is not that much pushback. And I'm not saying that's the wrong thing to go about things. They get most of their talking out of the way in the pre-race briefing and then the post-race briefing, whereas with Carlos, it's all the time, because Carlos simply does not subscribe to the idea of just saying copy every single time. He's most likely offering a blow-by-blow account as to what he's feeling at that precise moment. We got a snippet of it in Qatar, for example, when he suddenly went, "Oh no!" and he got understeer in turn 12, and we then just got this absolute drama going on as to whether or not Carlos would be getting another podium, which was picked up by the world feed. The point is that for Williams, this is A+ entertainment. No, actually, edutainment. And it's clear that his engineer Gaetan is willing to have a discussion about it and then go from there. It's something which can then be implemented and help Williams enhance their run plans. They've got something to work with. That kind of chatter may sound rather bland, but for this team, it's extremely spicy. And that's saying something coming from the Chile himself. And this started right from the very first race with him. From the first race when he crashed out and then had to sit within the pit wall, he became an additional strategist, according to Vowles. Instead of just slunking off to his room and then just sulking, he got stuck in and he helped his buddy Alex Albon to secure a top 5 place. Right off the bat, Williams were in 5th, and they pretty much remained there. Sainz being able to drag out as much data as possible, having been in those really unusually wet conditions, and help Alex steer his way through, especially considering he was getting a lot of pressure from the Ferraris behind him. So with that, Carlos will be able to help this team maybe make some more accurate shots in the dark, perhaps. You could call Carlos your GPS in moments when you're not exactly sure how a race is going to go down. And you could easily say that the whole Baku qualifying session was another example of that, making the most of it and starting on the front row. And what this proves is that with computers being so important in modern day Formula 1, if you can have a driver who is basically a walking, talking, breathing, sleeping version of a computer, that they're just in sync with one another, that's a fantastic calibration tool. And at a time when Williams are rapidly improving and then innovating and replacing all of their outdated equipment. Some of it so old that it was probably around before you out there were even born. And the cars are so complex, there's so much going on in the simulator. If you suddenly get your facts wrong, you could easily lead to a very bad time in the office. And I remember hearing a story where Haas had correlation going the other way, in that the car on the track was better than what the simulator was saying. So it was sort of under-delivering? That was weird. Especially considering that they were actually using Ferrari simulator, so they were getting more out of it than probably the main team. But it means that they can better optimize the final version of the car instead of chasing upgrade after upgrade trying to fix it. So just stick what you've got and then just get to know it more. Val straight up saying Sainz works well with the aerodynamic team too, guiding them through the data. It's like he just stepped out of the digital world or something. We may as well just call him Chilimon or something like that. So as you can imagine, Williams is really, really loving this working relationship right now. And I think Carlos is too, since it exceeded all of his expectations. Especially all of our expectations. I am so glad that my revenge arc is now back on course. It's not yet complete, he needs to win a race first, but it's certainly headed toward a very satisfying conclusion. And what makes this even more intriguing and worthwhile making into a video is that it contrasts quite a bit to his time at Ferrari. you begin to realise that his input over the radio was a bit different, and sometimes it wasn't even welcome, and actually, I remember all of the optics painting Carlos Sainz as being a bit of a selfish so-and-so. As in, why would you say such a thing? You're breaking rank. You're not working for the collective that is Ferrari, because that is an important thing to remember. There is no one person bigger than Ferrari. So, Carlos doing all of that, trying to come up with his own input, yeah, it did meet resistance and annoyance from some members of the Tifosi, and it all just goes back to that scene from Rush when Niki Lauda's just trashing a Ferrari, the mechanic then says, "You can't say that, it's a Ferrari!" Well, Carlos isn't afraid to say what he thinks, and Silverstone 2022 springs to mind almost instantly, the site of Carlos's first win. Ferrari asking him to back up the pack by 10 car lengths at the restart to protect Leclerc. Sainz refused and told them to stop inventing. That was Sainz doing what he always does, challenging a plan that doesn't match what's going on track. But in the context of Ferrari, unlike at Williams where everyone's all hands on deck, it would look in some ways, and to some people, as a little bit of a rebellion, a little bit of an act of mutiny. And we all know about Ferrari and how much they really embrace team orders, and quite frankly, they did eventually walk that back since it did guarantee at least one Ferrari won that Grand Prix, and it certainly got a lot more optics for the fact that, well, it was Carlos's first, but I can easily imagine a lot of people were frustrated because it didn't help out Charles at all, and this was still in the moment when he was thinking, I could still maybe clinch this title. It was that period, remember? And then there's Singapore 2023, that being an even more potent example. An endgame where he deliberately managed pace to keep Norris within DRS without instruction, so he could help out his buddy hold off the Mercedes of Russell and Hamilton, and then he could then go on to win. Ferrari then crediting it as entirely his idea, the driver having an original thought, and it's now gone down as one of the most audacious moves of the modern era. Absolute genius, and maybe a sign of Ferrari beginning to trust him when he's got some kind of plan. But at the same time, it did cause a little bit of friction, as well as previous examples when he would rail over the radio, because we heard it on the world feed. We heard the disagreement in the moment, in the heat of a battle or the middle of a race when adrenaline and tension is running high with the audience as well as the drivers. So in our minds, we then take it as, well, Carlos isn't being a team player now, is he? He's just thinking about himself. And with the context of Ferrari, this would come off as a moment of conflict. But the important thing to remember here is that we don't hear the post-race debrief or the Monday morning meeting back at the factory where they probably say, that was actually not too bad, Carlos, good job. Williams this year gives you the cleanest example of what happens when a team decides to let Sainz do his thing wholeheartedly. It results in a season which vastly exceeds anyone at Grove's expectations. Of course, it had its low points as he was betting himself in, with Miami exposing the risk of high bandwidth misfires if it's not telegraphed properly. It's not always been a smooth operation in Williams. You remember that chestnut. Sainz was being given the instruction to hold position, saying that Alex would not attack, and then Alex gets a message, a completely different message, that basically says, oh, just go through, mate, no problems here, and then Sainz is made to look like a bit of an idiot because Alex effectively caught him napping. It would make Carlos feel like he was a bit of a sleepy so-and-so, that he'd forgotten his siesta, and we heard all about that on the radio afterward, him just going, no, guys, that's not how I go racing. He was really thrown by that. He said that he lost his confidence in the team. It got that bad. And the most important thing is that, unlike at Ferrari probably, James didn't blame the drivers for the particular error, neither Alex or Carlos. The whole thing changing due to Carlos having a cooling issue after an first lap incident with Norris, and the actual command was buried amongst all of the verbal diarrhea, with Valves then promising going forward that only one voice would be heard for key moments like that. And that was really important because crossed wires would make Williams just as inept or unable to score competitive points like they had been for the last few years, that maybe James Valves wasn't all that hot after all. Well, now we're not saying that at all, because they got podiums. They have now scored well over 100 points. This is amazing for anyone to be a Williams fan. And Williams were also extremely lucky that they weren't a front-running team at that time, and that there was an even bigger meltdown going on between the two Ferrari drivers and the miscommunication there, because clearly the Scuderia were too busy making a cup of tea. But at the same time, the Miami mess was probably a very necessary one to have because it showed that Sainz's input and honesty and brutal feedback could easily lead to improvements within the team. I'm not saying Williams is perfect because Alex still gets very frustrated over the radio sometimes, but the frequency of those, "Oh my god, why are you saying these things?" or "Oh my god, stop talking," or "Why aren't you talking enough? Why are you telling me this?" It's happened far less often than it has in previous years. Albon getting really nettled by that. He gamely stress tests the team's communications protocols without fear of being punished for it later, unlike what he might have had at his beginning times of Ferrari. And when the message is sloppy, he'll tell you all about it, with Alex probably approving of that because, well, he, as I said, does the same thing. Thusly, Williams has a choice to make. Blame them for being both difficult or fix the protocol. Williams chose to fix the protocol, unlike what John Elkann would do with Lewis and Charles by saying that they probably should talk less. With James, we got the opposite, that their words were welcome, and that they would improve themselves, and look where we are right now. Now let's bring in Carlos's end of season quote. Here, he stuck to his way of doing things and improved progressively with the team. Thusly, they finished on good form. He talks about foundations and hunger and "I stuck to my way." That telling you that the communication-heavy approach has not been toned down at all, but instead refined and welcomed. And the Norris bit here matters too, because what Carlos is saying here is that he absolutely enjoyed seeing his buddy Lando, his former teammate, go on to win his first World Championship by being open and honest and true to himself. And still being able to win, because even though Lando had his challenges, he ultimately got it across the line. And then it goes hand in hand with Lando congratulating Carlos Sainz Sr. for the Qatar podium that his son got. There is clearly a very strong relationship between the Sainz family and the Norris family. And also, it's sort of defending Lando's anti-macho stance in being a world champion, because he still thinks that that guy is one of his best mates. You know, him referring to Lando as "my Muppet friend." And maybe a sign he's not forgotten his McLaren roots, because when you think about it, this year's Williams looks like McLaren's 2019 season in them trying to refocus and rebuild, and Carlos bringing home the bacon. When you look behind Williams' curtain, you realise that Carlos has been the absolute ultimate optimization ticket. He's been absolutely instrumental in not only improving this team and making them look competent, but also tapping into Alex Albon, who really didn't have a good barometer until Franco Colapinto briefly gave him a bit of a fright, because, wow, this kid's actually scoring points and really getting me off the line. And when Carlos had a wobble, Alex rose to the occasion. And when Alex fell back, Carlos rose to the occasion. And that meant that both drivers could secure the top 10 positions. That for a Williams team is amazing. And again, it goes back into the theory that Carlos just benefits teams, because look where Ferrari are right now. The timeline is so legit. Last year, they were just that far away from winning the constructors, 652 points to their name. This year, they're at the bottom of the frontrunners, 4th place with only 392. Now, of course, that's not solely down to Carlos Sainz not being there, because the car has changed massively, 95% different. What on earth were they thinking? I said this in a video the other day. If they realised that this SF25 wasn't a hiding to nowhere and they stopped development so early, according to them April, why didn't they just go back to last year's car, the SF24, and then bring whatever they can, what was good on the SF25, and go from there? It certainly didn't have the LICO problem. But at the same time, losing a driver like Carlos loses the anchor of strategic feedback. This could lead to a short-term dip before maybe they might be able to turn it around. Even Reuters noted the contrast to Ferrari not achieving a podium that year with Hamilton, while Sainz, with Williams, have been able to deliver 2 of them. Now, I'm not dunking on Hamilton or anything, and I don't think Reuters was trying to either. It's just an obvious data point, which is objectively true. Because we also have to consider that Lewis has faced plenty of other obstacles, which Carlos had probably gotten desensitized to and used to, such as, well, you know, internal Ferrari politics and resistance and stubbornness. Yeah, for Carlos, that was just a Tuesday, whereas with Lewis, that's probably been a really big major reality check coming from a Mercedes when they hung on his every word from the very beginning. And thusly, it left Ferrari looking really confused. And also, to be fair, if you've done anything technical out there, most of the time it's not down to one simple major fault. It's usually a bunch of little ones which start to pile up when you discover them. And then, of course, when you get a little bit of disagreements or internal drama like we get at Ferrari, someone says one thing, some may agree with them, others may say, well, no, it's not that, it's something completely different. You then get yourself bogged down in who was actually right here, what's the biggest priority, and therefore that slows you down. And then if the sim says something's okay, but then it doesn't translate to the track, you've got yourself a problem there, you don't know where to go. It just leaves you completely confused and aimless. The driver would like to think that the team is seeing what he is seeing, but then when it becomes clear that they're not, it then causes friction in that regard, and then even questioning their judgment, which may explain why Lewis is so down on his luck that he's unplugging himself from the Matrix over the winter, an absolute rarity for a king of social media. And in that light, you could describe Carlos as some sort of diagnostic antivirus or something like that, being able to go into the problem, running checks repeatedly, and constantly, doggedly so, trying to figure out the problems and then rectify them, and leaving no holds barred about it, not really caring about your feelings as long as it leads to an improvement. And if it leads to an improvement, then all is forgiven. Because he pushes the pit wall with all of his chattering over 9 hours of the stuff to fix a problem in real time, or at least try and mitigate it, to make it really clear what he is feeling, which then means it can go forward, and therefore it may be meaning in 2026 he doesn't have to talk quite as much. I'll be really looking forward to the sequel of this particular chart, so Stevie, please do this again for next year. And when it works, it has the added benefit of making the team look really calm under pressure and reaps the rewards for both drivers. But when it fails, like Miami, because if there's talking and too much of it, and then there's crossed wires, the failure is loud and fast. But thankfully, Williams have proven to be happy to learn from this with good grace. So when you put it that way, the original radio time chart stops looking like a gossip metric or anything, and it becomes a real means to judge how much error correction a driver is implementing in real time. Really depends on the material that we are getting. Most of it could actually be panic or frustration or demands for extra hand-holding. It's all really down to the particular context, and you could see really erratic differences from one race to another in a particular situation. But with Carlos, it's consistent. It seems to be a regular big chunk on that particular chart, meaning that there doesn't really just seem to be much deviation other than maybe, say, in Austria, Carlos doesn't really get over the line because his engine went bang. And speaking of that, this chart only covers the race commentary. Just imagine how verbose Carlos Sainz would be in free practice. And it just really proves that at Ferrari, the same behaviour would be more likely seen as drama because Ferrari's public failure mode is communication chaos, isn't it? Just look at all the headlines we've had this year involving Team Radio and Ferrari from both Charles and Lewis. Whenever we've heard them blow up, it makes big headlines, with Fred Vasseur then having to say, "Oh, well, don't worry, just calm down, it's not a really big deal, it's you the media making an absolute mountain out of a molehill." You then get the idea that, yeah, this is just intrinsic with Ferrari, whereas with Williams, they're a bit of a blank slate at the moment in that you really can't get a defined read as to how their radio conduct is being handled. Well, now, with Carlos and Alex happily jumping on board to reap the rewards, this is a bit of a collaborative force, this team. And it all implies that Sainz's value in being able to take what he's thinking and make it legible enough so that means his teammate and team can work with it is being really important for a midfield team wanting to become a legendary team once again. And the fact that we've seen so much of an improvement differentiates Carlos as being a driver who just likes to talk into becoming a driver who can teach. Therefore, this driver pairing lets the team stop debating symptoms like it may do with a rookie and Alex and get on fixing the team, which is really important. This saves weeks, people, especially in the cost cap era where time really is money. We all were worrying that 2024 was a damp squib and a false dawn after a fairly promising 2023. 2025, it's a completely different level, and that's down to the fact that this lineup of theirs, the 2025 one, was the best and most productively satisfying pairing that this team's had in 20 years, arguably since the days of Mark Webber and Nick Heidfeld. And when Carlos says that the Williams account has so far resulted in the highest workload he's ever had in his career, this could yield the biggest leap forward of any team he's worked with. There are no barriers or political red tape in his way. They are allowing Carlos to do whatever he wants to do. And when he leaves, yeah, you might see a short period where the team's decision-making looks a bit slow or a bit more cautious because, well, they lost a driver directly who could challenge their live model. But if Williams continues to be a fairly stable front runner, or maybe continues to improve after Carlos, that will tell you all you need to know. That Sainz was able to, for the first time in his Formula One career, get down to the absolute beating heart of Williams and change it to mirror his own image that would, hopefully, last way longer than his full-time racing career. If this could go on for the next phase of Williams' existence, this will be a sign where Carlos Sainz has actually been recognised as, most likely, Formula One's most useful driver. He would be leaving behind a working model that can handle pressure and actually think in real time and encourage their drivers to talk about what they're feeling on the radio instead of just saying yes or copy. And that is championship thinking material. And the best part of all of this is that this doesn't rely on Carlos being the fastest driver out there. Again, I'm not saying he is, because there are other talented drivers out there who are part of the elite. But what we can say here is that if you're looking for a good value driver that can help out your team, Carlos is your best bet. And that's why we all kept thinking that, well, if Red Bull wants to try and improve things and have a car which is absolutely the best, you put Carlos and Max at the same team. Yeah, we might initially think it's chaos, but those two men who were teammates at Toro Rosso are completely different people now, way more mature. They would be able to work together. But hey, Carlos and Alex, that's still a pretty good combo too. They're both Red Bull veterans. This chart recognizes something that is more than just simple lap time. It credits clarity under chaos and the ability to translate feel into decision making, with Sainz's weird superpower being that he's good at making the team think clearly whilst also driving at nearly 200 miles an hour. Sort of like his buddy and compatriot Fernando, because this team went from being at the back of the grid last year to being right well in the mix at the top of the midfield in just 12 months when they weren't really even trying to be. They just wound up there. All thanks to Carlos's smooth operation and Alex Albon absolutely loving it. And one thing I think you will be loving is this video right here, because this is definitely up your alley. So I'll see you over there.